I'm Ni'ma Al-Bagher in Khartoum, Sudan, and this is CNN.
There's an hour left of trading, and the Dow, look at the number, it's lower, and in fact it has gone lower. There's all sorts of undertones, undercurrents, which we will discuss over the course of this program that give you an idea of why the market is unhappy. It's not fallen out of bed, it's unhappy today, and we'll discuss why, the markets and the events that are causing it. One of them, China's promising a forceful response after the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has arrived in Taiwan. In Germany, in Hanover, they're cutting the hot water and heating in public places and buildings to save energy. The mayor of Hanover is with me tonight. And Uber shares surged. The company's finally positive cash flow, which would be a norm for 90% of the world's businesses. But with Uber, well, you never know. We're live in New York. It is Tuesday, it's August the 2nd. I'm Richard Quest, and I mean business. Good evening. It's the middle of the night in Taipei, where the visit by the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has inflamed tensions with Beijing. China's response, swift, seething. Its military has been placed on high alert off the coast of Taiwan, and the country announced targeted military operations around the island. The Chinese government says Pelosi's visit is a clear violation of the One China principle and policy that the US has signed up for. It accuses the United States of using Taiwan to try to contain China. Talking to us earlier on CNN, the Chinese ambassador to the US warned of consequences.
We will take whatever we can to respond and to protect, to safeguard our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And our response will be very firm, strong, and forceful.
Well, we got the message. It'll be strong and it'll be forceful. Tensions over Taiwan sent a chill, strong and forceful chills through the Asian markets. The grid shows Hong Kong, the Nikkei, they're all down sharply, but obviously the Chinese most affected ones of Hang Seng in Hong Kong and the Shanghai A index down more than 2%. So the market's off in Asia. Selena Wang is with me. Selena is in Beijing. Selena, why do the Chinese get so exercised over a visit by a US politician? Look, they are going to make this more of an event than it would otherwise be by their reaction.
Well, I think there are a number of areas here to kind of really understand the context of this. First of all, the Taiwan issue is a core part of the very DNA of the Communist Party and its legitimacy. This has always been a sensitive and touchy issue. You also have a leader in China who is China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong, and he has made it one of his goals to reunify the mainland, the motherland, with Taiwan. Now, China does not buy what the U.S. is saying, basically what you're saying, that this is just another congressional visit. From China's perspective, they're saying, we think that this is a violation of the One China principle that America agreed to by sending in the person who is second in line to the presidency. So a very, very touchy issue for China. And it's also coming at a time when Xi Jinping cannot afford to look weak. We're just months away from a key political meeting when he's expected to be reanointed for an unprecedented third term. So a lot of the threats that you're hearing, they are, of course, directed to the U.S., but they're also directed to the domestic political audience here. We've seen a lot of nationalism and patriotism get whipped up as a result of this meeting. It's actually distracting from a lot of the problems at home right now. But in terms of the actual reaction, we are seeing a show of military force, as was expected from the fiery language from China's military leading up to this. Taiwan's defense ministry said that they had found 21 warplanes.
Let me just jump in, if I may. Forgive me, but I just want to focus. I know the planes have been sent in and have been sent in before, but aside from, I mean, the Chinese are unlikely to want to get into a shooting match over this. But on the economic front, the sort of damage that they could inflict either on Taiwan or on the United States, are they minded to do that? Bearing in mind their own economy is so weak as a result of COVID and the zero COVID policy.
Well, Pelosi's only been in Taiwan for a few hours now, so we're still tracking the reaction. And so far, all we've been able to confirm is the fact that they had the warplanes flying into Taiwan's self-declared airspace, as well as the promise that they're going to have a series of targeted military operations and more military drills around Taiwan. The economic blowback is possible, so is diplomatic blowback. But to your point, it's not in China's self-interest for this conflict to escalate, especially at a time when the economy has been devastated by the pandemic. You're still having cities here going into snap lockdowns. So the key here is striking a balance where China can show the world that we care about this issue, we're extremely angry, and it saves face, while also not escalating this into a crisis that would have serious damage to the people and to the economy here.
Right. Selina, in Beijing, early morning for you there, 3 a.m. Thank you for staying up late tonight. I expect you've got a few days of that ahead. I'm grateful. China says the US is playing with fire in Taiwan. The experts are worrying the flames could spread to the global economy, as we were just discussing. After all, let's just take the Taiwan Strait as an example on global trade. Now, about 90% of the world's largest container ships sailed through it this year. The conflict in the Strait would just devastate, worsen supply chains. And there's more, of course. Taiwan supplies 90% of the world's semiconductors. TSMC, the most advanced maker, says if China were to invade, factories there would be rendered inoperable. Max Marcus is the former US ambassador to China, former senator from Montana. The former ambassador is with me now. Same question to you to start off with. Because obviously when you were there between 14 and 17, you had the same niceties to worry about, that you didn't appear to sort of give any succor to the idea of Taiwan independence or democracy. So when you see Nancy Pelosi there, what do you think?
Well, first, Taiwan is existential to the Chinese, not just to President Xi Jinping, but also to the Chinese people. They very much believe and want Taiwan to be part of China. Second, in the last few years, the situation is more dire for many reasons. One is we're just not talking to each other. When I was serving as ambassador, there were many conversations, many delegations. President Obama met several times with President Xi. There are virtually no visits now. Part of it's because of COVID, but irrespective of the reason, there's no visits. And the relationship just has gone south. It's much more intense now. China feels that it is an equal partner to the United States. They feel that way now. They did not feel that way as much a few years ago. So because it's existential, because it's they feel they're a major player in the world today, this is a very huge problem. My view, frankly, is that she should not have gone. The goal of the U.S. foreign policy is to reduce tensions with China, not increase tensions. And her visit clearly is increasing tensions. There's no foreign policy reason for her to go. The Taiwanese know that we support them.
Right. But Ambassador, surely the Chinese are savvy enough to know that there's an element of US domestic politics. There's an element of, and that if they just ignored it and, just sort of said, US politicians gone, fine, go, do what you want. Would it be such a disaster for China?
Well, the problem is this, of her visit, if you read her statement explaining why she's going, it just reeks of a very strong rhetoric in favor of Taiwan and very much in hatred, virtually, of China. It's an amazing statement, frankly. And so she's not just a visitor. She's not just a member of Congress. She's a speaker, and she's saying what she is saying. And again, this is an existential issue to Taiwan. The more Taiwan starts to look like it's becoming more independent, the more China is going to take aggressive action. They have no choice.
Do you believe, what happens economically as a result of this visit. Do you think the Chinese just focus on saber rattling in the Strait, or do you think they actually take some economic measures wider?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think you're right to focus significantly on the economy. Already we have huge supply disruption issues, and the Chinese economy is not doing well. The U.S. economy is not doing that well either, frankly. The world economy is not doing that well due to COVID and the Ukraine war, et cetera. And so, and remember, Chinese, as much as anything, worship stability. I mean, they want to be stable. Right. They don't want to disrupt very much. And the U.S. is the same way. So I'm guessing their very significant actions may not be military. They could be something else. It could be economic. It could. There's a whole range of issues that China can undertake, but it'll be significant, no question.
And I was just finding that statement that you were talking about. The speaker said, our discussions will focus on reaffirming our support for our partner. America's solidarity with the 23 million people is more important than ever as the world faces a choice between autocracy and democracy. Take that, President Xi, one could say.
Yeah, and I think her statement's a bit disingenuous. And add to that, she's a member of Congress. She can do what she wants. She is not the president. She doesn't have to worry about foreign policy worldwide. The president does, but she doesn't, and that's just, but that's a problem because she's the speaker and people listen to her.
Right. Finally, you obviously have still very good contacts and strong relations with China. From your view, is there a wish by the Chinese to improve relations with the United States, or are they content with the current level of, if you like, saber rattling, not talking to each other, basically rivals on the global economic stage?
I spend a lot of time talking to my friends in China, and it's clear they would rather work with the United States. It's changed a bit in the last several years. But when I was over there, my gosh, Chinese, they just almost revered America. Open space, the blue skies, the mountains, the democracy, a form of government. I mean, almost revered. It's changed now, partly because of the tension and because the propaganda machine in China has ramped up its rhetoric against the United States. But by and large, deep down, most Chinese want to work with America. Why? Because they're just like American people. What do they care about? They care about food on the table, decent income, take care of their kids. And they know that that's more likely the more that they work with the largest country in the world, the United States.
Ambassador, thank you, sir, for joining us from magnificent state of Montana. I'm grateful that you were with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Richard.
In a moment, Questions Business. Cold showers and turn off the lights. Well, it's all part of the policies of Hanover to try to save oil. He'll be with me. The mayor will be with me next. The city cutting down on its use of energy.
Africa Avant-Garde in association with Access Bank. More than banking.
I'm sorry you had to put up with your father's BS all your life.
I've had an investor tell me I can't finance your film because your lead is black. And that is even African American. Now you're talking about Africa. Just by saying Africa, the doors are shut. No one is interested because no one thinks you're capable.
You like?
Oh, Zimkita, it is a definite yes.
So when I started in the industry 10 years ago, I think the hard part of it was really coming into a very male-dominated industry. But I think it's changing a lot more. I think there was a recognition also from funding bodies that that was happening, and a lot of interventions were made to kind of change that.
We share this place, we all belong.
So many questions about what is the federal government doing. Do you get the anger that is out here?
How concerned are you about the front line?
You don't believe that there's a racial divide here?
Looking back, as president, did you tell the story of race in America enough, do you think? All the places I've been and all the things I've seen, all the people I've talked to, I carry with me. They're a part of what I do right here, holding the powerful accountable, keeping them honest.
AC360, Tuesday through Saturday only on CNN.
The G7, that's the group of 7 industrial countries, largest, is considering actions that would curb Russia's oil profits. They are saying they could prohibit transportation of Russian oil unless it's purchased below a specific price. We're back to the cap or floor. The idea would be to cut Russia's income and curtail its ability to wage war. This is coming from the foreign ministers of the G7, and they've accused the country of using energy as a tool of geopolitical coercion. Lithuania's president, not a G7 member, but obviously a member of the EU, claimed to CNN earlier today exactly that.
We have a lot of experiences and examples that this dependence was used just for manipulation and blackmailing. And now we see that Russia is doing the same to our partners in European Union, especially Germany.
Now, as Russia continues to squeeze the gas supply to Europe, Hanover is enacting the harshest energy restrictions that Germany's seen in some 5 decades. The idea, of course, conserve energy. So, public buildings will no longer have hot water or lights on in the evening. Heating will be reduced and public fountains are being turned off. The mayor of Hanover says the goal is to reduce energy by 15%. There seems to be public support, or at least for this degree of sacrifice. A ZDF TV network poll asked people in Germany if they would continue to support Ukraine despite the rising cost of energy. 70% said yes. Berit One is the mayor of Hanover and is with me now. I guess, of course, one hears these things, turn off the lights, turn off the fountains, switch down the heat, no hot water. And you ask yourself, how realistic is it? How much of this is tokenism versus measures that will actually have an appreciable benefit?
I mean, we see that we are in an absolutely unpredictable situation when it comes to Russia's energy policy. It's becoming more and more hard to know what the next steps of Putin and Russia are. That means we have to get prepared in Russia, in Germany, and especially in Hanover, in big cities like in Hanover. And I think these measures we are working on, when we presented last week, are...
Oh, well, there we are. The line is breaking up, sir. I'll have one more go with a question, then we'll move on. We are having difficulty. You've got breakup on the picture. I tell you what. Why don't we move on, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. Mayor, where hopefully we'll have a better connection, because you're talking about important things that I wish to hear about, and our dear viewer wishes to. Uber says it made more money than it spent for the very first time. Second quarter ridership surged. The company's Q2 cash flow was $382 million, a huge turnaround from Q2 last year when it burned through nearly $400 million, arguably, of course, pandemic related. Uber shares are up strongly today as the revenue beat what everybody was expecting. The company Uber still reported a net loss of $2.6 billion from investments in similar companies like Didi and Grab, of which we've spoken about many times. Rahel's with me. And let's look at this cash positive business. This is the norm in most companies. But for Uber, it is the exception. But have they turned, pardon the pun, the corner?
Well, Richard, the question was never, is Uber a real business, right? It was, can they make money? And Uber is showing in this quarter and last that if you look at its core units, its core business, Uber Eats, Uber Delivery, Rides, for example, it is making money. I just got off the phone with an analyst who covers the company very closely, Dan Ives, who said that, look, they are making money. Let's look at some of the financials. So $8.1 billion for the quarter, Richard. Compare that to last quarter, $6.9 billion. So a nice bump there on earnings, adjusted earnings, $364 million. Compare that, I think we can pull it up for you, to the last quarter, and that was $168 million. So look, they're making more money. And again, the question wasn't, do they have a business? Do they have a service? We all take Ubers, right? I mean, there are 21 million trips per day, according to the company. It was, can they save money? Can they generate cash? And they're showing that they can do that. They were able to do that, Richard, this quarter by sort of finding efficiencies in terms of average cost per transaction. So through the algorithm, they were able to make route more efficient, more profitable. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing the numbers we're seeing today.
Right. And I mean, let's not dwell on the misery of Didi. The Questmeans business, dear viewer, will be well aware that we bought 4 shares in Didi, and I'm not sure it's an over-the-counter stock now. We haven't quite discovered where they are, but we will. Back to Uber. Is this a sign of success of the management?
I think so. In fact, Dan Ives said that this is the new normal. Richard, you might remember a few months ago on this very show, you and I were talking about that note that leaked from Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi to workers about a seismic shift in the market and how the company was going to have to start focusing on cost cutting. Well, this is that. Dan Ives pointing to this, saying that this is a result of that note, in part, that they started to manage their costs. And when I asked, well, will we see more of this? He told me yes, because this is a new normal. Uber cannot continue to just, build businesses, look at other businesses. They do have to show that they can make money.
So where do they grow?
Well, I think they're going to have to continue to grow from efficiencies, right? I mean, the company pointed to
No, that's not growth. That's not growth. That is massaging, if you will, efficiencies. Where do they organically grow?
Well, I mean, they're already in 70 countries, right? So if you're making the point that they're already saturated, perhaps you can make that point. However, the company would point to its Uber Eats business and its Uber delivery business. You could argue one of the most sort of sensitive areas for any company right now is COVID. And you could argue with COVID, Uber is sort of shielded, right? I mean, if you see a COVID spike in a country, well, you see less ridership, but you see more delivery for its Uber Eats business. So it certainly is the biggest player. Some might say it's saturated. Uber would say it's the biggest player, and it can continue to benefit on efficiencies.
Well, that's brilliant. That's why we have you. Put it in beautiful perspective. Thank you. Grateful. BP stock is higher today. The company had its most profitable quarter in 14 years. Hardly surprising when you think about the way oil prices have risen. $8 billion in Q2, triple what it made a year earlier. The energy companies struck gold after Russia's invasion sent prices soaring. CNN's Claire Sebastian now reports people are getting very hot under the collar at the profits of the oil companies.
This is becoming a running theme for big oil this quarter. BP joining a suite of its rivals in coming out with eye-watering profits of $8.5 billion in the 3 months to June. That's more than 3 times what it earned in the same quarter last year, as Russia's war, of course, has led to energy supply disruptions and soaring prices. The company said that the profits were driven by strong refining margins, likely the result of a global shortage in refining capacity, and what it called an exceptional quarter for oil trading. Now, what's BP doing with all that cash? Well, a lot of it is going straight back to shareholders. The company increased its dividend by 10% and announced another $3.5 billion share buyback program on top of the more than $4 billion it's already bought back in the first half of the year. Now, of course, none of this looks very good politically, adding fuel to an already heated debate about whether these oil companies should be raking in so much cash when UK energy consumers are facing a historic cost of living crisis and probably another big rise in energy bills in the autumn. Greenpeace UK said in a tweet, there's something particularly obscene and cruel about gas companies like Shell and BP making record profits while consumers are going to struggle to keep warm this winter. The Secretary General of Unite, one of the UK's biggest trade unions, also weighing in, calling this, quote, an epidemic of unfettered profiteering. Well, the UK has already imposed a windfall tax of 25% on energy companies. Critics, of course, saying it's not enough, especially with BP forecasting energy prices will remain high through the next quarter. Claire Sebastian, CNN, London.
Right. Hopefully we've now got the mayor in Hanover, who's back with me. Mr. Mayor, are you with me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hello.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So we're just, again, this idea of, I suppose it is a question that everybody now has to be prepared for significant sacrifice, particularly if you look at Germany and the need to get the level of oil imports from Russia down by nearly as much again as has already fallen.
I mean, we see that Germany has a special situation due to the dependence on Russian gas. So that means we have a special responsibility. We need to prepare ourselves for the winter. That means we have to save energy right now. That's what we are doing in Hanover. Like you already mentioned, we turn off the lights for monumental buildings. We use just cold water for swimming pools and showers in the gym and the sports halls. We will prepare ourselves for the winter and have like midterm or long-term measures for the winter, just heating up to maximum 20 degrees. And that means every kilowatt hour counts to prepare ourselves for the winter.
What's the most you can do you think? Because at the end of the day, if we look at Germany's requirement for this, to reduce capacity of oil from Russia, how much more can you do?
I mean, we see that these measures, these limitations are quite heavy. I mean, it's okay for the summer. We have like 30 degrees at the moment. It's not that problem to take a cold shower or to go to the swimming pool with cold water. But when it comes to the winter, I mean, I'm quite afraid of having a social shift maybe. And so I think we need to prepare ourselves the best way possible to save energy as much as possible within the European Union as well, as an act of solidarity with the other European countries, and also as an act of solidarity with the people in the Ukraine. I mean, Kiev is just 2 hours flight distance from Hanover. There's a war going on in the middle of Europe, and that means we have to share solidarity and show what we can.
And this idea of cutting Russian oil, I suppose the lesson we've learned is that post Crimea a lot more should have been done. And I'm guessing for policymakers like you never want to find yourself in this sort of situation again.
I think we should change our energy policies. The situation we are now facing as Germany is the result of 20 years of a lot of mistakes in energy policy. That means we have to invest much more in renewable energy. We have to cut off Russian gas, and that means we have to prepare ourselves for the next 2 winters. It's not this year, actually. The next year will also be a problem, because to get independent from Russian gas will take at least 2 years to invest as much as possible in LNG terminals and other renewable energies.
Right.
So I think this is a way for Germany to a very hard time for us.
Right. One area I just want to quickly ask you about, obviously the inflation that's now in Europe at the moment. For somebody like yourself who has to run city services, who has to balance the procurement of everything from salt for the roads to things in schools, to the wages for city employees, it's going to be a very difficult 12 months to balance your books.
Absolutely. I mean, like I mentioned, I think these limitations during the summer is not that hard, is not that problem. But when it comes to a winter and the heat costs explode and we have a high price risk, actually, we are facing for the winter, and the inflation is also going high. So, I mean, that's a very explosive mixture for social shifts and for social problems also in Germany and the whole European Union. I mean, that's why we have to prepare and save energy right now to face this problem. And on the other hand, we need also help and invest from the federal governments and from the European Union, like we had, for example, during the Corona pandemic, when different social agencies got help from the European Union directly.
Mr. Mayor, grateful, sir. The Mayor of Hanover joining me live tonight from Hanover. Press Means Business. As oil companies revel in their record profits, the people, I do beg your pardon, as we come along tonight, US is expanding sanctions against Russian officials. Vladimir Putin is, well, there's one particular person who's being sanctioned within his inner circle, you might say. We'll explain after the break.
Flight attendants have been called boots in the air. Their ability to detect and discern human trafficking and literally save lives. I'm Nancy Rivard, president and founder of Airline Ambassadors, speaking to you from my office here in El Salvador. Many of us travel frequently for business or pleasure, and we have things on our mind, but it's important for those people to remember to be aware of their surroundings. They may be missing clothes of the person just next to them that could be trafficked. So you're looking for someone that seems frightened, ashamed, or nervous. They may have bruises on their body. One thing we teach is never try to rescue a victim. The main thing is to report it to the closest person you can. Time is of the essence in a travel situation.
I think it is the opportunity of government, and it's the opportunity of the private sector, and it's the opportunity of our American communities to welcome refugees. You know, the fall of the Afghan government, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you know, these have triggered massive displacement events at a scale and speed not seen in decades. I think what we've discovered at Welcome.us is while there are significant capacity constraints to overcome, they can best be overcome when we tap into the extraordinary capacity of our American communities, our civic organizations, and our private sector. Refugees often arrive with a wide variety of professional and educational backgrounds. And what we know from the refugee experience is that they're extraordinarily successful. Attracting newcomers and welcoming them robustly is a win-win for everybody.
I'm Blake Essig in Tokyo, and this is CNN.
Hello, I'm Richard Quest. A lot more Quest Means Business as we continue tonight. The US is preparing to sanction one of President Putin's closest confidants, his reputed girlfriend. We'll talk about that. And the White House is preparing to deliver its first press briefing since Speaker Pelosi arrived in Taiwan. We will get to it all after the headlines, because this is CNN, and here the news always comes first. The US says the Taliban could face consequences for having harboured al-Qaeda's leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. The White House says it located the head of the militant group in Kabul and carried out a drone strike that killed him. President Biden said he authorised the attack after long and careful planning. Ukrainian forces say Russia is bearing down on the eastern part of the country with intense shelling. And it says the attacks have been targeting civilian infrastructure in the Donetsk region. Ukraine started the mandatory evacuation of civilians in Donetsk. The first grain ship to leave Ukraine since Russia invaded is now anchored off the coast of Istanbul. It's the first major stop on its journey to Lebanon. It will deliver 26,000 tons of corn. Turkey says officials will inspect the ship on Wednesday before it continues on its way. The American basketball star Brittney Griner was in court again a short while ago. in Moscow. She's being detained in Russia on drug possession charges. It was her 7th hearing and her first appearance since it was learned the White House was offering to exchange a Russian arms dealer for her and another US citizen. If convicted, she faces 10 years in prison. She's set to return to court later in the week. Officials in the US state of Kentucky say the death toll from the number of severe flooding has climbed to 3 dozen. Extreme heat in the coming days is going to pose challenges for survivors who are stranded or don't have electricity. The Kentucky governor says more than 1,300 water rescues have been performed since last week. Our top story, Nancy Pelosi has arrived in Taiwan, excuse me, despite China's threats of retaliation. The Speaker of the House says she went there to reaffirm the US commitment to freedom and democracy. The outgoing Colombian president has said he's worried about democracy around the world. I spoke to President Ivan Duque Marquez only days before he hands over power to his successor next weekend. The president criticized leaders that he says use democracy to turn their countries into autocracies, and he said he'll continue to use his voice once he's left office.
It comes to an end, and there's a new moment in life. So my life doesn't depend on the presidency. I've served my country with pleasure, with honor, with decency, and also willing to accomplish more than 90% of my electoral program and 85% of our national development plan in the middle of a pandemic. So I feel satisfied of those accomplishments. But now a new moment in life will begin, and I will continue to serve globally in environmental matters, in migration, and also in the defense of private initiative. There have been items that I have defended for a long time, and definitely the defense of democracy.
Do you worry your successor will unwind many of the policies? I'm thinking, for example, oil and gas and exploration and coal, the sort of things where he has very different views than you.
Well, I think, Richard, when you're in the opposition, you might have some points of views, but when you come to government, you have to serve everybody. And for the good of Colombia, we need to sustain the possibility of expanding our fortitude in terms of oil and gas. Actually, last week, we announced the biggest gas discovery since 1992 that doubles our reserves. And when you look at what we have done here in Colombia in the last 4 years, we have been able to expand our production. And basically, we have reached record highs in financial results in Ecopetrol. And the reason why Colombia needs oil and gas is because this sector represents more than 40% of the exports. It represents, roughly speaking, 35% of the foreign direct investment. It represents almost 40% of the foreign exchange market in Colombia. And it's also the main source of royalties. And actually, it's also one of the sectors that contributes the most in tax collections. So if you kill that golden hen, well, you lose the main sources of resources in order to contain poverty and to expand public investment. So I consider that you can be good in oil and gas, as we have done, but also be good at the transition. And Colombia has now a very clean energy matrix. Colombia is leading the energy transition in Latin America. So I think both things can go in a balance.
Do you worry about the state of democracy in Central and South America? Do you worry?
I'm worried about the future of democracy worldwide, Richard. Some people take it for granted. And what happens with democracy is like what happens to health. When you have it, you take it for granted. When you start losing it, you then want to come ferociously to defend it. And I think we have to be preventive enough to identify those things that can harm democracy all over the world. And I think the defense of democracy has to be something that we reflect, that we write, that we discuss, that we travel around the world, explaining to other countries, to other people, to other leaders, how to prevent that democracy is not harmed by populism, by post-truth, by polarization, and by autocrats that are emerging in times of high inflation, that are emerging in times of political debate. So I think we have to be conscious about that.
Wasn't it always like this? I mean, you think back to how the most awful dictators of history came to power, obviously Germany before the Second World War is the number one example of how a leader comes to power, gerrymanders the rules, turns it into an autocracy, and everything follows from there on. And yet at the same time, people still are attracted to strong leaders. That is an irrefutable truth.
Yes, but I think there's something that in which I consider the world has also evolved. And it is, Richard, that having the separation of powers, having the possibility of renewing the political power every certain time or defined time, that serves the people in a good way. But you've said something very important. Now, you don't want to replicate those examples that we saw in the 1940s, in the 1930s, because if you don't know history, you're condemned to repeat it. So we have to be able to tell the people today which speeches, which discourses are trying to replicate those moments of despair and those dark moments in history, because it can happen. And it has been happening in other countries. When you see what's going on in Nicaragua, it's very complicated. And the same thing has happened in Venezuela. But there are other leaders around the world who are looking at that example, who want to have illimited re-elections, then capture the court system, then capture the parliament, and then try to threat the independent media until they capture the whole essence of power. And by that time, what you have is a fully annihilation of liberties. So I think being able to systematize that, to tell the story and look at the positive cases and the negative cases, I think is very important. And I think that's a commitment that I have and that I will sustain once I finish my presidency, because those are values that I trust.
And there's the president of Colombia, the outgoing. Now at the White House, a press briefing. The first since Nancy Pelosi arrived. Let's join.
Specifics of that operation and the extension also of truce in Yemen, which is incredibly important, and any other foreign policy news of the day. With that, I give you John Kirby, National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications.
Thanks, great.
There you go.
Appreciate it. That's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful.
Okay, as Karine noted, and you all obviously been tracking the president's announcement yesterday that on the 30th of July, the United States undertook a precision counterterrorism operation in Kabul. They targeted and killed al-Qaeda's leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Zawahiri was the world's most wanted terrorist. He was Osama bin Laden's deputy during the 9/11 attacks and became his successor in 2011, following bin Laden's death during a U.S. counterterrorism mission. Zawahiri continued to pose an active threat to U.S. persons, interests, and national security. As President Biden has consistently said, we will not allow Afghanistan to become a safe haven for terrorists who might bring harm to Americans, to the homeland. We met that commitment. This action demonstrates that without American forces on the ground in Afghanistan and in harm's way, we still remain able to identify and locate even the world's most wanted terrorist, and then take the action to remove him from the battlefield. That is the definition, this mission, of when we talked a year ago, of over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability. What we did this past weekend is a perfect, clean example of what that capability looks like. Now on to Taiwan. As you have all seen, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, arrived in Taiwan earlier this morning, East Coast time. As we have said, the Speaker has the right to visit Taiwan. And a Speaker of the House has visited Taiwan before without incident, as have many members of Congress over the years, including this year. Now, this trip was the Speaker's decision, and Congress is an independent branch of government. You all know that. We're obviously monitoring her travel, as we always do for members of Congress, and we've taken all appropriate measures to ensure the safety of her travel throughout the region. Let me be clear. The Speaker's visit is totally consistent with our long-standing One China policy. We've been very clear that nothing has changed about our One China policy, which is guided, of course, by the Taiwan Relations Act, 3 joint U.S. PRC communiques, and the 6 assurances. We've said that we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We've said we do not support Taiwan independence. And we've said, as I said again yesterday, that we expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means. And we have communicated this directly to the PRC at the highest levels, including in last week's call between President Biden and President Xi. National Security Advisor, Secretaries of State and Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have also made this very clear to Beijing in a half a dozen recent high-level conversations. Now, we've seen a number of announcements from the PRC in just the last several hours that are, unfortunately, right in line with what we had anticipated and what we talked about yesterday. Now, there's no reason, as I said yesterday, for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with longstanding U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis, or use it as a pretext to increase aggressiveness and military activity in or around the Taiwan Strait, now or beyond her travel. And again, as I made clear yesterday, before the Speaker's travel was confirmed by her, China has positioned itself to take further steps. And we expect that they will continue to react over a longer-term horizon. I couldn't give you a date certain of what that horizon looks like, but we certainly would expect them to react even beyond her trip, including announcing additional large-scale live-fire exercises. Of course, they've already started doing some of that today, flying across the median line. We've seen press reports of them doing that today, and using economic coercion. It's exactly in line with the playbook that we anticipated and talked to you about yesterday. The United States will not seek and does not want a crisis. We are prepared to manage what Beijing chooses to do. At the same time, we will not engage in saber rattling. We will continue to operate in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific as we have done for decades. We will continue to support Taiwan, defend a free and open Indo-Pacific, and seek to maintain communication with Beijing. We will keep doing what we are doing, which is supporting cross-strait peace and stability. And then just real quick, lastly, Karine hinted at this at the top. The President welcomes today's announcement of an extension of the truce in the Yemen conflict. The truce in Yemen, of course, was a key agenda item during the President's visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met with the King and the Crown Prince, and with leaders from across the region. We're grateful for the leadership of Saudi Arabia throughout this truce process, as well as for the Sultan and leaders of Oman, who have also played an important role throughout. Now, this truce is now going on 5 months, has brought a period of unprecedented calm in Yemen, saving thousands of lives and bringing tangible relief for countless Yemenis. 5 months, which may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 7 years of war and thousands of Yemeni lives, it counts for a lot. And now we have a chance to extend this another 2 months. So we urge the Yemeni parties to seize this opportunity to work constructively under UN auspices to reach an inclusive, comprehensive agreement that paves the way for a durable, Yemeni-led resolution to the conflict. Advancing the peace process is going to require courage and dedication from all sides. The United States will remain committed and engaged in efforts to advance peace in Yemen and to bring relief to the Yemeni people. And with that, we'll take some questions.
Thank you. Thank you. John, how concerned is the administration right now that the Afghanistan has become a safe haven for terrorists?
I think if you were to ask some members of Al-Qaeda, ask them how safe they feel in Afghanistan right now. I think we proved to a fare thee well this weekend that it isn't a safe haven, and it isn't going to be going forward.
What will the repercussions be for the Taliban harboring al-Zawahiri?
I'm not going to telegraph moves and decisions that we might make. I'm certainly not going to get ahead of anything at this point. I would just make 2 points. One, the strike itself shows how serious we are about accountability, shows how serious we are about defending our interests. And we're going to maintain, as I said at the outset, we're going to maintain this over-the-horizon capability. In fact, I'd go so far as to say we're going to continue to try to improve that capability going forward. And number two, we've communicated very directly with Taliban leaders our views of their willingness at some level, of course, to harbor Zawahiri and his family. And we have made it clear that not we believe, not we think, not we suppose, but we know that that's a violation of the Doha Agreement.
So obviously, John, just to follow up on that, clearly this shows accountability for Zawahiri and for al-Qaeda, wherever they are, as you got him in Afghanistan, but it doesn't show accountability for what the Secretary of State described as a gross violation of the Doha Agreement. So can you commit that there will be some act to demonstrate that they will be held accountable in some way? And how do you do that without it looking like, yep, we'll just take out one by one, you can keep allowing more in?
Well, again, I'm not going to telegraph punches that haven't been thrown yet, or decisions that haven't been made yet. We're going to stay vigilant to the threat. We've made it clear to the Taliban that we know what they did, and we know who they harbored, and we know some of the steps they tried to take after the strike to cover up the evidence of it. So we're mindful of it. But I'm not going to get ahead of decisions, policy decisions that haven't been made. I mean, it's not that we take the Taliban at their word, but just indulge me for a second. They claim they want a relationship with the United States and with the West. They claim they want to open up and be part of the international community. They claim they want financing. That's exactly right, Peter. So if that's true, if that's what they really want, then it would behoove them to pay close attention to what we just did over the weekend and to meet their agreements under the Doha Agreement.
Without identifying them, how many other al-Qaeda individuals or leaders do you assess are presently living in Afghanistan?
I'm not going to get into intelligence matters, Peter. We said even before we left Afghanistan last August that we knew al-Qaeda was present in Afghanistan in relatively small numbers, and we know that there are still some al-Qaeda fighters in Afghanistan. I would, again, without getting into classified information here, I would say the number's not very large, and that's core Al-Qaeda. There are also offshoots like ISIS-K, which we know are very active in Afghanistan and right now. The other thing that I want to say, and I know rightly we're focused on Afghanistan, but again I want to take you back in time a little bit to about a year ago when we talked about this threat and then our departure from Afghanistan. We know that Al-Qaeda has metastasized, both in terms of character. Now they've got different offshoot groups, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and ISIS has got splinter groups of its own. But they've also metastasized geographically. They're not focused as much in a presence in Afghanistan. They're in North Africa. They're in the Sahel. They're throughout the Middle East. They're in Yemen. So, I mean, there are other counterterrorism threats in other parts of the world. We're going to stay focused on them all. I get that we're focused on Afghanistan right now, but we're not taking our eye off the rest of the world either.
John, something you just said is not consistent with what we were told last year. You're saying that you've always known there was a small number of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. President Biden said, what interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone?
Yeah, I mean, in a major way, al-Qaeda was not playing no, wait, let me finish. They weren't playing a major role in operations or resourcing or planning in Afghanistan. But Peter, I know specifically because I was at a different podium a year ago, and we talked about the fact that Al-Qaeda had a presence in Afghanistan, but small and not incredibly powerful or potent. And I think, again, without getting into numbers, we would still assess that to be the case.
So we know that the Taliban was harboring the world's most wanted terrorist. You guys gave a whole country to a bunch of people that are on the FBI most wanted list. What did you think was going to happen?
I would take issue with the premise that we gave a whole country to terrorist groups. I mean, again, I'd encourage you to ask.
The world's #1 terrorist. How is that not giving a country to a terrorist sympathizing group, if not giving them permission to have terrorists just sit on a balcony?
The question, I mean, Peter, the way you asked that, it makes it sound like we owned Afghanistan a year ago. It wasn't our country. It was an independent sovereign state. And the president made a bold decision to end a war that had been going on for 20 years because he believed then, and still believes now, that our national security interests are best met by meeting the threats of today, not the threats of 2001. And I don't want to relitigate the whole war here, but obviously no one anticipated the Ghani government to fall as fast as it did. But we said at the time that as we depart Afghanistan, we're going to keep vigilant. We're going to